All right, so it's 10 o'clock, so let's go ahead and begin, everyone. Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel on collaboration during COVID-19, lessons learned from multi-stakeholder efforts. My name is Sharon Avendaño. I am a program associate with the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, and I'm humbled today to be at the same virtual table with some of my favorite people as a moderator for this discussion with some of Hawaii's great nonprofit community and government leaders working tirelessly every day to support people without stable housing. Before we begin, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. Our discussion will be about 1 hour long and is part of a two-part series on collaboration, the second of which begins at 11 a.m. and we'll discuss lessons learned in a collective effort to support our Pacific Islander community. Please feel free to log off 5 or so minutes before 11 to make it to that exciting session. During this panel discussion, if you have any questions, please send them in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to address them either during this discussion or afterward via email. Our rockstar host, Justin Limasa, mahalo Justin, is pasting his email in the comment box. So please feel free to email him with any questions you may have for our panel. With that, it is a privilege to introduce the 5 devoted community leaders on our panel today. Brandee Menino is the Executive Director of Hope Services Hawaii and Chair of Bridging the Gap, the Neighbor Island Continuum of Care. At Hope Services, Brandee is focused on ending homelessness on Hawaii Island and has been a primary organizer of community efforts to provide emergency housing during emergencies on the Big Island, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Mahalo for joining us, Brandee.
Thanks for having me.
Sharon Hirota, Homelessness Coordinator on Hawaii Island and Executive Assistant to Mayor Harry Kim, has been pivotal in coordinating community response with the County of Hawaii and coordinating government agencies in emergency response. Mahalo for joining us, Sharon.
Mahalo, thanks for having me.
On Kauai, we have Mel Lopez. Melody Lopez is Program Administrator for Catholic Charities Hawaii Kauai office and Vice Chair for Kauai Community Alliance. Mel has played a key role in convening Kauai's nonprofits to coordinate outreach efforts. Mahalo for joining us, Mel.
Aloha, and thank you for having me.
Maya Tayal, Community Program Director at Hale Opio, Kauai, where she focuses on administrating various programs that service community and foster youth and has been active in Kauai Community Alliance. Mahalo for joining us, Maya.
Mahalo, thank you for having me.
And lastly, but definitely not least, Ashton Varner, Kauai County Homelessness Coordinator, who has been crucial in coordinating government partners with nonprofits to coordinate homelessness outreach. Aloha to Ashton.
Thanks for having me.
So mahalo to each of you for joining us and sharing your mana'o today as we discuss collaboration, its importance, and the value of it in all of our efforts, especially in the homelessness space. And we're excited to just dive in because we have, a little bit less than an hour. So Brandee and Sharon, was hoping we could start with you. If you could begin by helping take us to Hawaii Island in the early days of the pandemic, and just help us understand what families, particularly the unsheltered community on Hawaii Island, was experiencing due to the pandemic, and what led to the collective efforts around emergency housing and rent relief that you and other partners came together to implement. Mahalo, Brandee.
Well, thanks, Sean. In the early times of COVID, I think just like everybody else throughout the state was trying to figure out how to operate in a different way. And so we were at that time, looking at sheltering in place. And the question that resonated with us among our families and those who are unsheltered was really like, well, where are our unshelters going to shelter in place? Like I could go home, right, to a safe place and shelter in place, but looking at places, looking at opportunities. So one of the early lifts was partnering with the Holiday Inn Express, with Department of Health and the county, and pivoting our Ohana zones to see and how we can make that work. So we're at the early stages. That was one of our first programs, was lifting up emergency sheltering in Kailua Kona, about 40 hotel rooms, targeting those with immune compromised systems and the kupuna. we're able to do that as a partnership. Also with the Rotary Club and faith communities who would help us with meals and meal preparation and delivery as well. So it really took an early effort. And at that time, the county, and Sharon could talk more about this, but in lifting up the 50 emergency units, micro units that the county purchased and lifting those programs up. Maybe Sharon, you want to add into that?
Sure. So in addition to the partnership with Hope Services, lifting up those hotel rooms, we also were looking for other opportunities in other parts of the island. And so partnered with our local supplier, HPM Building Supply, and really connected with them and said, this is what we need, this is what we're looking for. And really they came forward and said, here's a product that we can deliver in a very short period of time. Within, I think from the start of the conversation to the end of the first build, it was a matter of 3 weeks, and allowed us to purchase 50 micro homes, and then looking for space. So luckily we had from parking lot areas in county parks that had access to showers, as well as restroom facilities and office space. And that increased from 40 and then adding the 50, the 32 initially in East Hawaii, and then eventually adding 18 more in West Hawaii, I think really helped us to immediately address the needs of those that were unsheltered, and really help them gain access to appropriate hygiene products, as well as services and wraparound services. And it continues today, the sheltering, at least the 50 sheltering units.
Thank you, Sharon. Brandee, could you talk a little bit about just some of the muscle that you'd already developed in Hawaii Island around emergency response, and how those previous experiences in collaborating with nonprofits, like you mentioned, the faith communities, Rotary clubs, helped inform some of those preliminary efforts in this pandemic?
Sure. I think early on, right, we just went back to what we knew. I mean, our community is not new to disasters, from a response in the disaster relief of Tropical Storm Rizal, lava, Hurricane Lane, and then the Kilauea eruption in 2018. So we've had consistency in our community disasters. So what we really did was go back to that team of organizations and partnerships and lift that up, and really look towards the partnerships in lifting up the program that county wanted us to implement this time, which was the rent and mortgage assistance. And it was quite a bit of money. So the ask was, hey, how are we gonna lift this up? I said, well, it's gonna reach out to all the different partners who are doing this work or similar work and see if they would have the capacity to do that. And that's what we did this time, was really leverage the existing organizations in our community that were doing similar work in previous disasters, right? This wasn't our first rodeo. Learned from those lessons, what worked, what didn't work, and then carry forward now. And what we learned carrying forward was that we needed to have a process that was simple and clear to the user, right? In the past, we had them going to different doors of organizations. This time in the rent and mortgage, we did 6 organizations utilize one application same questions. We put it on all of our websites, our agency websites. We marketed in one flyer all the different services that we would be able to provide, the eligibility for the program, and spoke in one voice, right? So we worked more as a network than as individual organizations. And that's what really helped us to get to the point where we're asking the county now for more money because we're running out or it's done, and we still have people to serve, right? So the community, our nonprofits, those 6 organizations were Neighborhood Place of Puna, Habitat for Humanity, Hope Services Hawaii, Hawaii Community Lending, Hawaii Island Home for Recovery, and one more. Sharon, you want to help me out?
Hawaiian Community Assets.
Hawaiian Community Assets. Yeah, so we've met every week since the launch of the program, right? We met before. We decided on the expectations that we could all agree to, that we would provide the same level of services, that it would be on one shared database, and we would work in the same way, and that no matter what door that they went, really online or by phone, they would applicants would expect the same level of service. So they had choice. They could decide what organization that they could see and work with in completing their application and documents. So that's what we've done and what we continue to do. And we meet every Wednesday. And we also case conference. So if there were like a gray area case, we would work together every week on those cases. We had not HMIS, but a data administrator of this data, Neighborhood Place of Puna, and they would talk to us about any of our quality data. And then they reported this data to the county in real time. And then Sharon could talk to you about that as well.
Thanks, Brandee. So just to add on to what Brandee said, when the pandemic hit us in late January, early February, the first thing that came to my mind was, I need to get my partners together because we need to, as a team, with the county involved, how do we address the needs, especially for our most vulnerable population, those that were unsheltered. And then moving on now to as the rent and mortgage program. And I think for the county, it was more about knowing what our role was and getting access to funding, and then working with our partners. And certainly, looking at from the community's perspective, as they look into it, what we wanted to prevent was, as Brandee said, people having to call 6 different agencies and then picking and choosing which agency, thinking that they're going to get better service or quicker service, but then understanding there's only one door. You go through and you'll get all those services. But what we've been able to achieve through these 6 agencies, at least from my perspective, is the consistency in the delivery of services. So the program started, by the time we launched was mid-August. And as of last week, Saturday, which was November 14th, we've helped over 1,300 families on the island that consists of over 4,000 household members, paying out close to $7.5 million in rent and mortgage assistance. And I think that the role that the county played in all of this, outside of providing the funding, was listening and listening to the concerns. I would tell you the nonprofits were not shy in telling me what's working and what was not working. And me being able to be that conduit back to the team that was overseeing all of the contracts and going, okay, this is what the nonprofit is saying, this is what they're seeing on the ground. And then being able to support the nonprofit and saying, yes, okay, we're gonna make a contract amendment to address the specific needs. So I think it, from lessons learned, we've been, unfortunately, in one disaster after another, whether it be natural and natural disasters or not, but we've learned a lot. I've seen, and in this case, as Brandee, listed all of the partners, there are new partners at that table that we were able to be part of, and now, they're now part of the HUI. So the next time, we're gonna call on them to help us and to support us. So it's been a great. It's been a smooth implementation of the program, and we're seeing great results. And like Brandee said, they keep asking, and we keep trying to find the rock that has the money underneath it of it all. But 7.5 in a matter of weeks is amazing. They're still processing applications, and hopefully they'll be spending on close to another $1 million in the next week or two. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon and Brandee, and congratulations on that. Just such important collaboration and such a great model for county nonprofit and community feedback mechanisms to move forward these complex policies and make it easier for the families and the individuals that need it the most, right? One thing that you mentioned is the need to work more as a network versus individual organizations. And I wonder if that could take us over to Kauai. And, I'm looking at Melody and Maya, who are really connected to the community in Kauai and can help share some color as to what some of the gaps in access to services were for folks without housing on Kauai. Mel and Maya, I'm wondering if you could share some of that color from the last few months and what you were seeing both in the nonprofit sector in Kauai for opportunities to begin operating as a network to provide some of those services.
Definitely. And Kauai, as you folks know, also can relate to Big Island because we had a flood in 2018 and we've been doing natural disaster work as well on Kauai. So, it really boils down to relationships. That is the key. When you have established ongoing relationships with people, when it's time to collaborate and come together, it's a natural process. And, Kauai is known for that. The community really picks up the pieces when we need to, through disasters or something like this pandemic. But this was a special case I felt for Kauai because at the beginning of the pandemic, at the shutdown, we couldn't forget those that didn't have a place to shelter in place. And so I just want to thank the county for establishing safety zones so that we knew where the people were when we needed to access them and they needed to access us as service providers. And Ashton can speak to that more, how that came about. And I believe we were the only county that established safety zones, along with the trend of, not kicking people out and having them move. We're supposed to shelter in place. And so when you don't have a TV to keep updated with the news, when you don't have a cell phone to call your doctor or money to buy essential needs, how can we forget them, right? And so the immediate thought was, how are they going to access services? Because we know this most vulnerable population already had limited access to services. So I just wanted to paint that picture at the very beginning of the shutdown. The community outcry was abundant, and the calls, from government agencies, other nonprofits, trying to figure out what is the best plan, as well as funders such as Hawaii Community Foundation, they hopped in there right away and gave us a call and say, what is the landscape right now? What is the picture going on and what do we need? And so asking those important questions from the beginning is kind of what set the tone to provide, what we did establish later was a wonderful network of outreach providers coming together.
Agreed, Melody, you said it all. I feel like COVID really didn't cause a hiccup. I almost felt like it made us more mindful of our mission and almost brought us together even better. And like Melody said, it was seamless. It was almost like there was no break and the communication was there right from day one. Even pre-COVID shutdown, we were already all like, what can we do? What do we need to do? And it was very collaborative. And like I said, Kauai is unique in itself, as Hawaii is, I'm sure, different from the mainland in my experience. But I just felt like it almost just helped us prove what we were already doing, but just in a more collaborative effort and providing a united front for those in need. And having those safety zones were great. Yeah, we weren't able to do as many outreaches and individual services, but as an island-wide, I felt like it really united us and gave us the opportunity to shine and show what we can do for our community. And it's amazing how the homeless network, you talk to one and they give you all the information. Hey, help my neighbors. This is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. So they were a great resource in themselves outside of the community agencies and the professionals. So I give kudos to the community as well.
Thank you, Maya and Mel. Ashton, I wonder if you could share a little bit about the Kauai County perspective in establishing some of those safety zones, but also in your role in bringing together different government agencies. In the past, you've mentioned, the parks and different folks that are all, involved in increasing outreach and connectivity for people to the services that they need.
Yeah, definitely. So I jumped in July, so a lot of things were already, full swing in reaction to the pandemic. The 5 beach parks safety zones were already set up. But yeah, in my understanding, right, it was this invention to create a place for the homeless population to shelter in place and to, try to keep from moving around, because we know that's how this thing spreads. So that was out of necessity, and then I feel like here at the county, and then also with KCA, our Kauai Community Alliance, and the outreach efforts there, just used it to our benefit. We've got a big population of our homeless in these 5 spots. So when we need to plan an event, for instance, Kauai Housing Connect, which is this week, it was really a no-brainer as to where we would try to put it together. Whereas last year it was all inside in one spot. But of course this year that's just not possible, not feasible. So, we didn't have to think of where's the best outdoor location to get everybody to go to, because so many people are already there. So I think we really responded to the pandemic, the challenges, the realities that it's brought, and yeah, use it to our benefit, and done whatever we have to do. And yeah, total kudos to the outreach team. Like I said, it was already established when I got here, and I can't imagine Kauai without it. Yeah, fantastic group. My role here at the county, I hope, has been successful in terms of connecting other county departments with our outreach efforts, or just efforts in general. I really feel as if I'm a spot that both individuals as well as agencies from the community can come to for some answers, and then also our departments here within the county also, I feel like I'm maybe first or second contact of, what kind of insight do you have into what's going on out there, and kind of where we are in the process of maybe shifting people out of the parks or into our new housing and things like that. So that's really the biggest part of my role right now, especially as we have our beach parks, and the homeless population is more upfront in the community's eye. We haven't had a lot of data to explain an increase in, or not explain, but to give a number to an increase in homelessness. But now they're, instead of being a little bit more separated in the woods or something like that, they're easier to see in mass, and I think that's really what's happening there. But I really appreciate the collaboration that KCA has created, and kind of avoiding that repeating work. I like that we work smarter, not harder, and I think that's the real key to success. So I'm just happy to be part of it.
Thank you, Ashton. We could stay a little bit on Kauai. I'm wondering, Mel, if you could share, just for our audience, a little background on what KCA is, what Community Alliance is, and how it came about. And also, something that a lot of folks have shared, I think a lot of organizations and a lot of entities are trying to collaborate more and looking towards 2021 with a goal of collaborating more both with other nonprofits and also with government, especially with all the uncertainty around budgets that is to come. Wondering if you could share some of the challenges that were a part of establishing KCA and sustaining it, and how you've helped to get around some of those.
Thanks for that question, Sean. Great question. Well, Kauai Community Alliance, in the name in and of itself, right? We're an alliance on Kauai to end homelessness and look at other solutions for housing for especially those that are homeless. And we're the Continuum of Care local chapter on island. So Brandee, is bridging the gap chair for the Continuum of Care for the neighbor islands, and then as a neighbor island, we have our local chapter. And so Makana from Family Life Center is the chair of our Kauai Community Alliance, and I'm the vice chair. And we took on this role about 1.5 years ago. And at that time, KCA wasn't doing that well. And so when we took on the role, we attended Bridging the Gap a lot more, and we actually learned from our counterparts, right? So we learned from Big Island and Maui, and we heard all these wonderful things. And of course we want to, there's some competitiveness, right? Like, okay, what can Kauai do? And so with Makana, and as well as our past chair, Sharon Graham, who was also in the county, Ashton's position previously, she was on our leadership team. And so we worked together to really increase our membership and educate the community about us, spread public awareness. And we actually increased our membership ×2. We doubled it in a year and a half. Our meetings also, just people coming into the meetings and hearing about KCA doubled it as well. So we felt really good at that point that, we're doing something right, that the community can come to this centralized place in order to not duplicate services, right? So Sharon mentioned roles. Roles are really important because like a piece of a puzzle, you need every single piece to complete that puzzle. So no matter how big or small your role is, it's really important. And during this pandemic, we've got additional people who showed up to network with us. And one major one was just a community group, a local community group, people in the community who want to work with the homeless population, especially since they've seen the safety zones. And so we welcome them. We welcome people to come on board and share the mission of Kauai Community Alliance. And a lot of our agencies, our missions, like for Catholic Charities Hawaii, our mission aligns with KCA as well, right? Because we really look at the common good in the community and with vulnerable populations specifically. So that's KCA, and I just want to thank Makana, for hanging in there with me all year long. She did so much work, and also for Bridging the Gap, for showing us the way. So thank you.
Mahalo, Mel, and that's a great segue back over to Brandee and some of the on Hawaii Island that you and Sharon so wonderfully described, in bringing together the collective effort, and also in sharing that this wasn't your first rodeo, right? You'd done this before with other emergencies, other disasters, and I've had some chances to iron out some of the wrinkles. I'm wondering, Brandee and Sharon, if you could share some examples of, just some of the difficulties in bringing people together and taking the collective action approach, and how people and organizations interested in doing more collective action, what should be on their radar when they enter those types of collaborations.
Sure, I guess I'll start. I think because, well, what Melody said, right, was relationships. So as she said, that resonated, right? And then when Sharon said, nonprofits are not shy in asking anymore. So it's taken us years to get to this point of not being shy, not being afraid, speaking up, like really sharing like what's going to work based on our, the network's capacity and what's not going to work. And like one of those early on ask was, hey, like there's no way one organization can do this work. Like we need to lift up all the other partners who do similar work, whether they're big or small. But I said, but the biggest hurdle for nonprofits is there's this expectation that we got to cover the cost of these programs. And you're talking about millions. We got to spend millions in a very short time window. And we can't do fundraising, and we don't have like extra money growing on trees. So can the government really start to listen and look at, like, we want to help and we want to be mindful and we want to do this work because it's a heavy lift, but we got to meet us halfway and you got to pay us up front. Like that is huge, right? So that also made organizations say yes, right? Because the bigger organizations, we have some, backup, but not that much, not the $8.5 million that they want us to spend and give out. That's like, nobody has that, So we wanted to be very frank and clear up front of like, hey, in order for this to be successful, you need to trust that we can do the work, right? Because we go through annual audits, we go through compliances, just let us know what the expectations are and we'll let you know how it's going to work given what our network's capacity is. So that was really key of the government trusting and listening to our concerns early up and upfront. So I really appreciated that. We had someone, which is Sharon, directly inside the mayor's office who can advocate and be that voice with the larger team who's making these decisions. So that was one of the components.
So I think to add to what Brandee said, I think we've gotten to the point where where we are today, right? But we're here today because of all of the lessons learned from years before. I remember, being part of the team that was responding to the Kilauea eruptions, right? And I remember getting a call, and that's so vivid, right? Because Brandee and I were in a Bridging the Gap meeting on a Friday or Thursday, and we got notice on our phone that there was this large earthquake, and we literally looked at each other and said, "See you this weekend," because we're ramping up. So get our families ready because we're ramping. And certainly enough, at 12 o'clock on a Sunday, I called her and I said, "Hi, my friend, we need to open up a center tomorrow at 9. And in a matter of hours, we had partners from various organizations at a table trying to figure it out. But again, we had no plan. We had some knowledge from previous experience, but we were just trying to figure out what we were going to do to respond to the needs of our community. And I think a lot of what we learned through that was there were many partners who had so much energy at the beginning, and how do you keep them energized through the response? I mean, if you look at Kauai Island, we're still responding. We're still working with the long-term in households that have not become quote unquote whole. So how do we continue to keep the energy going, and how do we keep people at the table? And so we've had those challenges. Sometimes we had 40, when it was pre-COVID, right? You could have 40 people in a room trying to understand what was going on and wanting to deliver services, but being mindful about, okay, people, I think Melody said it, right? Understanding our roles. And I think that's where I got it from, was 10 organizations wanting to do the same thing versus, can you all talk to each other and figure out how we're going to do this over the long haul so that we don't run out of funding and or energy. So where we are today, I think, is a testament of a lot of work that we've done prior to this. And I think we're still learning and we're still building relationships. And we have as Brandee said, we have new partners at the table. And there are some partners that didn't come to the table this time around because they were busy doing, or they were involved in other projects. So again, it's just, and then also I think acknowledging the capacities of our nonprofit. And as Brandee said, really looking at being able to support at least the smaller nonprofits, to encourage them to say yes by saying, here's some funding for startup, and this is how we're gonna do it. And so we've brought more to the table who otherwise, I think, this time around would have probably told us no if there was no monies up front. So just wanted to share that. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon and Brandee. And I'm actually interested because, Sharon, you brought up the fact that lots of partners came in at the beginning with a lot of energy. And now, one of the key questions is sustaining that, right? And I think that's a key question for a lot of folks that are working in collective impact efforts everywhere. But, especially in Hawaii, a lot of relationships will bring people to the table, but then how do you sustain those? So I'm wondering, Brandee and Sharon, if you had some thoughts, you could share some advice for folks in impact efforts right now, in collaborations right now, on how, some advice for how they could help to sustain that, some tips for keeping the energy up.
What I think that is, we're all mission driven, whether nonprofits or government, right? So we understand our intention and our purpose. We're very purposeful. So no matter if we're coming from business or faith, we're mission driven. We have our why. So we show up because of our own personal lives. Second is we show up because we're accountable to our relationships, right? It's a big island, but we're a small community. So, I got to make sure that I'm responsive. So one of the sustainabilities is keeping each other accountable and just being consistent in reaching out, even between disasters, right? To work on planning, right? When things are not so hectic and crazy, actually what we're doing continuously is planning, of like, hey, what's the next thing? What are we going to strategically work on? How are we going to advocate? So it's used to be there was a slow period. There's no slow period now. There's always something that we're going to talk about. And I think even because of relationships, like Melody talked about, we have Bridging the Gap that over encompasses, all the neighbor islands where we meet monthly. We keep each other sustained and an update of what's going on. We constantly learn from each other. We're sharing resources. So there's just, I guess, keep planning, I guess would be one. Stay consistent with your relationships, connect and show up with your why, because everybody at the table is working together because they want a better community, right now and for the future generations.
And I think just to add to Brandee, what Brandee said from the government's perspective is also understanding government's role, right? We cannot do everything. We're too slow, right? But it's also understanding and acknowledging the work of a nonprofit because they have a better feel of what's actually going on the ground, and being able, as far as the government, to support that work in whatever role we play. And we play different roles. Sometimes we're the lead, sometimes we're just we're support, and other times we're just along for the ride and see the actions and the results. But I think for us, it's being involved and continuing to learn and understand the needs of our community, and then being able, at least for me, to work within the county systems and the different departments. I think Ashton said that, and being able to get other department heads and administrators and directors to see the need to get involved and to expedite and to move a little faster. So yeah, it's all about partnerships.
Thank you so much, Brandee and Sharon. Those are really helpful pieces of advice, I think, for our community right now. I'm wondering if on Kauai, you guys, Ashton, Maya, Mel, have any bits of advice, like not only for the starting up. I know KCA is at a different phase, like Melody, you mentioned, at a growth phase over the last year and a half with doubling participants. Just curious what some of your strategies have been with creating the coordinated outreach group, for example, to keep folks energized in the work. And it would be great to get some tips from you as well.
Okay, I can go first. The outreach efforts, I don't want anyone to ever undermine facilitation. When we have good facilitation, that can do a lot, so even if you are just a facilitator and that's your role, that's okay. And so that's what I did. I took on that role as facilitator for the outreach workers because they all do such great work. We had outreach workers throughout the years, right? But this hit. And so you could hear that they needed support. And I hope that that's what the outreach group became for them. So we took it from Kauai Community Alliance, most of the outreach workers there, and then brought in new people who were outreaching, such as like Department of Health, because again, it's a health, pandemic. And so Ho'olalahui Hawaii, who also offered education about COVID-19 and could do testing. And other different people came to the table that were interested in outreaching. And so facilitating that, and the first thing we actually did was establish roles because we needed to not duplicate. And some people who weren't doing homeless outreach didn't understand our coordinated entry system. So we got to learn from each other about how we could work together to really work on permanent housing, especially during a time like this that was so different. And so like Hale Opio Kauai, they have outreach for youth as well. And then with Ashton, she put on some amazing outreach efforts that were a little different. It was a twist, but it was needed. And it was because she heard what was needed. And so I'd like for them to share, actually, as the participants in the outreach group, what that provided, for them.
So thanks, Melody. Again, and I really cue in on something that Ashton had said about the mission. And I think because we're all so passionate, COVID did not stump us. It actually empowered us in our community and our community members, not just the nonprofits and the professionals. And I really feel like we're all very mission focused and passionate, regardless whether we're in a pandemic or not. And I think that's what has made us successful and what's going to push us forward. I've actually had an increase in number of people wanting to volunteer because of the pandemic, and people just approach me on the street, or they're like, "Oh, you were with Hale Opio, how can I help?" And it's just amazing. And I really feel that the collaboration and everybody having their role, no matter whether you volunteer one time, whether you're part of that outreach group, or whatever it is, any way that you can contribute and empower yourself and our community and empower those homeless members to help themselves and each other, I think that's what it's all about. And I think this has been a learning curve for us, and it's only going to help us be better. So I agree with what everybody's saying, and I feel really inspired.
Yeah, I feel like echoing what everyone has already said. That's kind of the nice thing about going last in these meetings, is that everybody's typically so on point. And I'm just like, yes, I agree. Someone mentioned trust, and I think that's a really big part of it. Certainly my job, as Sharon said, as a government force, it really varies what my role is in a given situation. So being able to trust our nonprofits or our community members and things like that to tell me what's going on in the community, to go after those grants that are going to help them create those programs that they know address a real issue within the community, I think is huge. Additionally, I would just emphasize communication again. I mean, I know right now, especially, we all have a lot of meetings that just take place right in front of the computer. So I don't know why that seems so much more draining than in person, but to me it does. And I just try to keep in mind that all of those meetings are totally there for a purpose. They're important. And even if, 8 out of 10 of them are kind of just a refresher on what you already knew, or, the updates are really what you expected, other programs to be in, 2 out of 10, there's going to be that little bit from, a funder that's doing a presentation that one day that is going to, answer your organization's problem, or, be such a good fit for that grant money to go into your program. And I think that's something to keep in mind, that a lot of people, either individuals or agencies, just don't know everything that's out there. I mean, how could any of us be able to keep up with that? There's so many great things happening. And I definitely see that as one of the benefits of my job, and being in so many various meetings with various entities, is being able to take that back to our agencies in our big meeting and say, hey, there's this funding, there's this program coming on board, there's this and that. And the communication is always huge, but I think in 2020 it's really paramount, because you don't have those ships passing as often in person to happen to hear it, and you do have to go to your virtual meetings and do it. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Ashton. That's such a helpful perspective, and always bringing us back to, the importance of connecting the dots between all the different organizations and government's role in having some of that landscape perspective. And also, some private funders' role in being able to take that step back and then hopefully help connect as well. I'm wondering, with just a few minutes left that we have before, I want to make sure there's time for folks to switch over to our exciting session 2 of this panel discussion with Pacific Islanders. Just a couple things for the attendees. If you do have any pressing questions, feel free, please, to put them in the Q&A, and we'll either answer them in the few remaining minutes we have left, or address them via email later. And then second, I'm wondering if each of you, and I'd like to start with Brandee. I think to that point of how can we help? How can each of us know our role? And to the point of what each of our strengths are, whether it be philanthropy, nonprofits, community members, government. I'm curious if you have some tips as to, or some suggestions as to, private philanthropy and government, what we can do better to help facilitate more collaboration.
I think one of my bright spots in my career is actually being a participant of Hawaii Community Foundation's Housing ASAP, which was a network. And that was the first time I participated as a family homeless shelter provider. So it was, I want to say 8 shelter providers across the state, and intentionally bringing us together to have these tough conversations of how to do things differently over, I think it was at 3 years, 2 to 3 years that they support, which introduced us to ENDong and ORCode, data evaluative practices. And typically, I mean, I would see these my colleagues in meetings, whether it's Partners in Care or the Interagency Council, but we didn't have time to like stop and talk and like just talk as human beings, right? So just we're able to develop that relationship in a day-long meeting, at lunch, have lunch together, break bread. We've also went to conferences, but just spending those times outside of our day-to-day operations of being a provider, but making connections at the executive level as well as the managers from the organizations. Because it was really, that was my first experience in really truly collaborating in doing grants together, learning from each other. Again, the relationship. So, being accountable to each other. We could just call directly. We had everybody's cell numbers, emails. And when opportunities came up, I want to do that too here on the Big Island. Just having that opportunity to learn from each other. And we're still doing that today. I think just before this conference, I was sharing with you that, hey, Holly is with IHS is helping us to build our capacity here at Hope Services in regards to the Medicaid insurance, going on that pathway of going beyond housing navigation and case management. So it continued, it started because of that. So if there's one thing, if I go back to the question of what can the philanthropic community do, is to do more of that, to support networks, right? And what you guys do best when you guys give us unrestricted dollars, that's even like the super awesomest thing, because it's those unrestricted dollars that we have, right, that we have in our pocket when you got unexpected things that happen in our community, that we're able as a provider to say yes to things early and quick. Because I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Weinberg gave us this $25,000 grant in COVID response. So let's use that as seed money to start up the Holiday Inn Express while we work out how we're gonna shift some Ohana funds. But it's really those kinds of things, is flexible funding, supporting networks, drive us to do the work that we do and do that better than as individual organizations.
Thank you, Brandee, so much. Mel, others, do you have anything else to add? Some other bits of advice around the importance of and the role that funders can play in facilitating collaboration and what you would suggest from your positions.
I totally agree with Brandee. She hit it on the nail, on the dot, right? So I've experienced the same thing, Brandee, with Hawaii Community Foundation. They facilitated a group, 10 to 15 people and got us talking. And when we get to talk and we build those relationships and maintain good relationships, and we can uplift each other knowing that we're all in the work together. We can't do it alone. I think that's the real message, right? We can't do it alone. What is our role and how can we contribute to these efforts? And so we get to look at each other in that facilitation, in that group, as complementary to each other and not competition. And so having that facilitation, Sean, I think even for you folks, you know, as a practice, it's really helpful. And we love unrestricted dollars. So yes, Brandee, I'm with you.
Wow. Maya, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna reiterate and add that, you know, our gift, I really feel like, and just kind of summarizing what everybody's been saying, is that, you know, knowing our role, staying in our lane and doing what we're good at and respecting that of our partners and educating our funders and also educating ourselves. You know, how can we be creative in these times and contribute in a different way or offer something new and, you know, make the most of what we have, even if we are lacking funds or having to scramble or ask somebody else, hey, you want to partner on this? Because if we do it together, then we can do it, you know? So just being creative, thinking outside that box and staying in our role. Like, we service youth, that's what we're good at. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to respect that Melody can do her thing, Ashton can do her thing, and Brandee and Sharon can do what they're good at. But, you know, knowing when to be fluid and flexible and ask for that help, speak up, you know, be direct, like they said. Yeah, because we're advocating for people that may not have that voice or access.
Mahalo, Maya. And I'm wondering, Sharon and Ashton, if you could share any couple words in our last few minutes just around, you know, Sharon, you advocated for and mentioned so much throughout this panel discussion around the importance of listening and the importance of being flexible and changing funds, changing contracts to be able to respond to what's happening in community. Can you share any last thoughts around the role government can play with other private funders in supporting those types of community-driven initiatives and playing that listening role?
Yeah, so I just, you know, I just want to reiterate what Brandee and Melody and Maya said, you know, in regards to, you know, the private fundings that support the work of our nonprofits here on the island. And I think that is so key, right? So, and I can give you a very good prime example in the midst of responding to the pandemic. And so, you know, Brandee's very well known on the island. So anybody needs help, everybody calls or texts Brandee, right? And there was an incident, I think I was part of the conversation where there were these two individuals in the emergency room at one of our hospitals who had no other means, and the recommendation was they need to go home, which was, I think it was somewhere in Colorado or somewhere. And so the first thought was, we'll call Brandee because maybe maybe she has dollars that she can use. And certainly, I think within 24 hours, the two individuals were on two different separate flights heading back home. And that prevented us from having to, you know, at that point, house two more people in our already crowded shelter. So when you talk about flexible funding, it also supports the county because we have a space to go to and say, hey, is this the situation? Can you help us out? Because for the government to go through that process, it'll probably take us 2 weeks to get that plane ticket, if we ever get it. But again, having that flexible funds really helps. From my perspective, was like, I think I know who I can call, right? And so it's just, and now sometimes people bypass me and they call her directly. It's like, excuse me. But I just wanted to reiterate. But I think going back to what you said, a lot of times, at least I can speak for our island, we sit around a table and we have these conversations. When the leaders, in this case of our homeless providers, come together and they bring back ideas, I guess finding a way to have a government/private partnership, right? So how do we work together to fund, and sometimes some creative ideas that may not always align with federal state types of funding programs, but try to test and pilot out some, where county and private can kind of test to see if it works, and then work based on results moving forward. But I think that's where my strong advocacy is. How can we continue to work what's out there, and how do we join forces together to build capacity here? Just build capacity in total. So thank you.
Yeah, I can't say it better than that.
Thank you. Perfect. Well, that's perfect timing, everyone, and such great last words from Sharon. And I'll just close out with a couple key takeaways as folks head over to the next panel with some of the words that I think will be really important for anyone looking to start or be a part of a collaborative when they're beginning, and how to help sustain it. But like everyone on this panel mentioned, the importance of knowing your role, right? Whether it be in government, nonprofit, in the community, and that everyone has a role to play. Like Mel mentioned, a facilitator role is incredibly important. All these different roles are crucial in moving forward a collaborative. So identifying yours and then having clear expectations of what those roles are, and being able to hold each other accountable, and helping hold each other accountable is a lot easier when everyone trusts each other and has built those relationships. And that's just a key important part of a collaborative effort. And like Brandee mentioned with the Housing ASAP work, not only in a professional space, but learning from each other and knowing each other as people is really important to leading successful collaboratives. And then the last thing I'll say that has come up multiple times, just that importance of everyone, I think, listening and learning, and having that listening and learning mindset from the beginning, whether it be government or funders that can be able to be flexible with some of the funds and change some of the contracts, and also nonprofits with their communities that they serve, right, on Hawaii Island, and how you've been able to increase outreach to certain communities, knowing that the data is showing you that, oh, those communities aren't being reached. How do you help build that in, listen, learn, and continue to iterate, and keep planning and stay consistent with your relationships and show up. So that's what I've taken away, and I'm so grateful for each of you for sharing your mana'o over the last hour, and for all that you do in your communities. You each serve as such fantastic models, I think, for everyone looking to be in the housing space and do so collaboratively. So mahalo for taking the time, and mahalo for everyone who attended. We had over 50 attendees on this panel, so really successful showing. Thank you all for being a part of it, and have a great rest of your day.